Hi, welcome to the Bourbon Friday show. We're at the end of a long work week. We take a much-deserved break, have a little bit of bourbon, and meet someone awesome from the St. Louis startup community. So I'm very excited for our guest today. I have Darryl Palmer here, and he is with both Janus Choice as well as Singularity University. So we're going to be talking about both of those. So first of all, Darryl, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for joining us. So let's start with your full-time job, which is Janus Choice, where you're the CTO, right?
Yes.
So tell us, what does Janus Choice do?
Well, no one knows what's going to happen in the future. And so people are going to have falls, heart attacks, and strokes. And when that happens, especially for older adults, when they leave the hospital, they'll still need some type of care after leaving it. So this could be inpatient rehab, this could be home health. And so right now with the process, it's very stressful and traumatic for the patient and the family to find the right care providers. And so what we do is we make that process easier.
Okay.
And so on one side, you can think of it almost like Match.com.
Okay.
We match the patient's clinical, financial, and social needs with the best providers out there.
Oh, okay.
And so the reason that's a problem is that, hospitals specialize. These facilities do too.
Okay.
And so when they're taking, let's say, a zip code here in St. Louis, for one zip code, there's about 200 different home health care providers.
Wow.
So it's not like which ones are good if you have a hip replacement are the ones that are the best if you are a stroke survivor.
Okay.
And so we make that matching better, but we also give information to the patient and the family the way they can absorb it and nudge them to go there. So we make videos, photos, other information to really build on that trust.
Okay.
So they can make a choice that's better for their care and also helps reduce some of the waste, financial waste in the system.
Wow, that's awesome. So if someone is in need of the service, let's say they have a parent that was just in the hospital with one of these issues, do they just go to your website, or what's the best way to get that assistance?
So our solution's used from the hospital. So it's a clinical solution. So right now, instead of a nurse coming to the bedside with sheets of paper, they'll more come with a tablet device that engages the family so they can participate in the discussion.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you're selling to the hospital.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. So if you were in a hospital, get in touch, right?
Right. Definitely,
Cool.
definitely.
Well, I want to spend most of our interview today actually talking about the brand new chapter of Singularity University, and you're the president, right?
Ambassador.
Ambassador. Okay,
Yes.
sorry, ambassador. So this is, you said your inaugural meeting is June 14th, but the chapter is established here in St. Louis?
Right. And so the chapter was officially announced in April.
Okay.
And so our first event will be June 14th here at T-Rex.
Okay.
And it's really focusing on digital inclusion.
Digital inclusion. All right,
Yes.
cool. Well, so I want to get a little more into what that means in a few seconds here, but let's start with what is Singularity University?
Okay.
I guess first is, what is the Singularity, for those of us that don't know much about it?
Well, the term singularity is based on Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near.
Okay.
And that's where the word comes from. But when you look at Singularity University itself and what it is, Singularity University is a global community that uses exponential technology. So this is things like AI, blockchain, gene therapy to tackle some of the world's greatest problems and really bring abundance for all, for everyone on the planet. And so 12 different challenges they have identified, like healthcare, prosperity, governance, disaster resilience, water. And so when you're looking at application of AI, application of blockchain, application of using computing and other technologies, it enables problems to be solved that before would have required large corporations or large governments to do. And so the power that people can do to impact the world is much greater than what it was before.
Okay, so we're talking about doing things that would have required these big institutions before, but doing them through, is it individuals or smaller groups? Or
So these are entrepreneurs. So this is like people who are very passionate about solving a problem. They have the tools right now to actually make an impact.
Okay.
For that, yes.
Okay, so making that happen, enabling that process.
Correct.
Okay, so I know you said exponential technologies, and we were talking a little bit before the show about the difference between something exponential and incremental, and I think most of us kind of think of incremental improvements, right? It's like, I'm not going to lose all the weight I have tomorrow. I need to lose 1 pound in the next week and take small steps, right? So we're pretty conditioned to think that way. So when you say exponential technology, how does that work differently?
So, part of our view of the world is that things are linear, right? So like incremental improvement day over day.
Yep.
But one of the things that Ray Kurzweil found when he investigated technology and different advancements in human not just technology, but medicine, other areas like that, was that it's more exponential. And so when you're looking at, let's say, a simple thing like doubling, right? You might say, today I have 1 unit of something, tomorrow I might have 2, the next day it might be 4, then it might be 8. That doubling that happens, that's usually, and then it starts exploding as you go farther ahead. So when you're looking at, let's say, going to the moon, right? We went to the moon on something that is really less powerful than not just your phone, less powerful than your smartwatch, right? And so in a very short time frame, something that took large, massive abilities, you have private companies now doing space travel, right? True. Before you would think of only NASA or only Russia being able to do that. And so now you're looking at genetics, gene therapy. So all of these things are happening on a very quicker time frame. So this next 100 years, the advancements of humanity will be almost the same as the previous 2,000 years.
Wow. Okay.
Right?
Because of that exponential.
Because of that exponential use, right? And so using AI, using blockchain, using computers, thinking that you don't need brick and mortars. You could do things virtually. You could do things, democratizing it. Really opens up to solve a lot of problems on a scale that was not really doable before.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like, I mean, really one of the challenges here, I guess, is getting people to think differently since we're so conditioned to think linearly. So what do you do? So how does Singularity University help people kind of get out of that thinking and move more towards this approach? So
a lot, we're also a Singularity University portfolio company. And so when you look at a lot of their programming and other techniques they use, it's really coming up with that long-term vision of what would the ideal world be like. And that, even though that's your North Star, that's not achievable. But you have to have that vision to know what direction you're moving into. And then you go and look at convergence of different technology. And so the problem you might want to solve is in governance. And you might think governance is, you have to change it through formal laws, formal process. Governance. You can solve problems that you would think that a formal structure would need to have done before, but doesn't require to do. Right.
Do you have an example of a current problem that might be able to be addressed that way?
When you're looking at one of the biggest things is allocating resources to the community to solve issues. And so the classic way that it would happen is that after a problem is identified, task force would be created. The task force would go through, identify the problems in the area, identify ways of fixing it, then allocate a budget for it, and try to have some measurable impact. So the time from the problem to actually dollars being available in the network and having impact in the community might be 2 years. It might be 3 years. By the time that happens, the problem has moved. The world has shifted. So if you're thinking exponentially, it's more like, can we actually make money available in 4 months? 5 months. What will it take for that? And you look at the process, and a lot of parts of the process is saying that if you're saying that the problem is identifying how to make the dollars impactful, there were other projects before, and they were already measured historical performance. And it's really knowing what was the causes of a project being successful, and how is what you want to do similar or dissimilar from that. And we're talking about allocating funding and dollars. Do you actually have to do it in a more formal way and have big bang projects, right? Because that's a lot of times when the government thinks about it. We're going to put down millions of dollars just to solve this problem. But there's interconnected issues. And so when you're talking about, can you actually have smaller projects that run simultaneously? And now the problem is, how do you manage it? So now we're talking about the use of blockchain for contract negotiation and for making sure that deliverables happen. And you're using AI not really to replace people, using AI to more identify what is the performance of these different activities and how they interconnected.
Interesting. So one thing that came up, we were talking about AI last week on the show, and one thing that we talked about briefly was the Mark Zuckerberg being in Congress and testifying, about Facebook and how kind of little the senators and congressmen seem to understand some of this technology. So, I mean, it sounds like it maybe goes even beyond the people not understanding it, but maybe even the systems of governance that we have set up that maybe are not optimized this way. I mean, how much of our existing systems do you think would need to be updated or scrapped or fixed in order to implement some of this, or is it different approach than that altogether?
Well, I mean, one of the things we're looking at uses of technology, you have to realize that there's infrastructure created. Mm-hmm. And so we were talking, I guess, earlier about wireless versus wire technology.
Yeah.
And so one of the burdens in the United States is that we have a huge wired network. Mm-hmm. And that made the advancement of wireless technology slower. So other countries were able to leapfrog us and just embrace wireless. And so now when you're thinking about the problems we're having with these infrastructures and these for AI, you have to think past the organizational structures we have, the brick and mortar institutions we have, and have that ideal view of the future. This is what I was talking about before.
Sure.
And then seeing how to approach it. And so for sometimes it might be saying that for this certain problem you're solving, that first bowling pin you're looking at is somewhere that is not currently addressed by government.
Gotcha.
Right? And so there could be an informal governance structure created where you build a community and empower them to solve a problem, not necessarily under the auspices of the city, county, or state.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right?
So it sounds like a lot of the solutions are going to come from smaller, kind of addressing smaller, more individualized type of scenarios, but the overall effect would be much larger is the result? Yeah.
And so it's really coming up with solutions that can impact 1 billion people and moving forward in that progress to do it. Right?
Cool. All right. So getting more into kind of examples here so we can continue to try to dig into this a little bit. So you work in the health field, right? You were talking about better matching people, which sounds like it's kind of an example of some of this approach, or?
Yeah, and so when you're looking at demographics in the world, right? Before there was the view that population continues to grow, population will be a problem.
Yeah.
The reality now is population is not growing.
Yeah, I heard
population is dwindling down. And so now the issue is that as time progresses, there'll be less people available to take care of our aging parents.
Yeah.
So now how will older adults, aging population be taken care of? And so there's not going to be enough people. There's not going to be enough resources and funding. There's not going to be enough doctors, not going to be enough nurses. And so we're looking at the silver tsunami that's happening. Already, there's massive shortages of nurses in the United States and doctors. And it's a huge infrastructure cost to create them.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And you have people who leave their jobs to take care of their parents. I mean, right now in the US, people spend more taking care of their parents than they do their children.
Really?
And when you take off work to take care of your parents, it has long-term impacts on your career. And so when you're talking about what we're doing in this segment right now, it's really still addressing the need of how do you create a world where being old does not mean you have to be a burden.
Interesting. Okay.
Right.
Man, that's some heavy duty stuff, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So I guess if we're looking more for, but let's talk more about something fun here. I guess, if we're thinking short term in the next 5 to 10 years, versus like 100 years from now, what are, I think of like self-driving cars, for instance, is something that applies to this, but what are some examples of, changes that you think we're going to see that are going to really impact us as individuals that we were not maybe aware of?
When you're looking at the different areas in convergence that's happening right now, it's really unlocking the potential for education. That's a big area. So, at least redefining what education means for the youth, not just the youth, but for workforce employment, workforce training. It doesn't require a teacher. It doesn't require a brick and mortar. And does the teacher have to be local, or can it be virtual?
Okay.
We were talking about healthcare. You have lots of advancements now in gene therapy, lots of advancements in precision medicine. And it's now, how do you not only have these advancements, how do you make it accessible? Okay. Right?
Yeah.
What if procedures and operations were 100 times cheaper? What if you're talking about across the globe, one of the biggest issues is eyeglasses.
Really? Okay.
Right? They have a lot of people that have problems seeing, and they don't have optometrists.
Sure.
They don't have doctors. Why do you need an optometrist to do an eye test? A lot of people around the world have a phone. Can you actually use a phone to do an eye test?
Okay.
Right? And then once you do that, can they actually get a prescription and stuff like that from there? We were talking about melanoma and skin treatment using devices for that. So all of these things that were bounded by people and hospitals, technology really unlocks that.
Interesting, yeah. So it sounds like the underlying theme here is that as technology is exponentially growing and has drastically improved in even just the past 10 years, we're still not keeping up with thinking about it appropriately. Right?
Correct.
So schools is one that really stands out. My mom's a teacher, so when we've discussed this before actually, and it is interesting to think that anytime I learn, I get on the internet. I'm on Google. I'm looking things up. I'm reading things, watching videos, and then I think of these kids and they're still in a traditional classroom setting, but they go home and they're all over their devices, right? I mean, they know how to use this stuff. So why haven't we made that transition then? I mean, what is, because that's something I think it sounds like is almost a disadvantage to the United States, is that we were so far ahead. We got so used to the way that things worked, and now that is almost holding us back from this exponential change, right? So is there any reason we're still doing things that way, or is it just we're comfortable and we're not gonna change without a kick in the butt, or what do we do there?
I wouldn't say it's not we're not gonna change without a kick in the butt. I wouldn't phrase it like that.
Sure.
But a lot of the things is it's easy to fall back in that incremental thinking, right?
Sure. Okay.
And exposing people to the possibility of exponential technology, they can then look at how it can be addressed for different problems, right?
Okay.
Some people think of AI and blockchain, and they think of something just for technologists. Mm-hmm. And that is not where the power is. The power is in transforming our world using this. Okay. And so the more individuals that are exposed to the possibility and see the application for the problems they're passionate about fixing, that's really the true power is.
Okay, gotcha. So unlocking the individual to work on these bigger problems.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So obviously this is pretty deep stuff. It's pretty cool to talk about. If somebody's watching this and they want to get involved in Singularity University, so June 14th is the first meeting. Should they just come to that, or should they register online, or how do they get involved?
Yeah, so they just can come to that session, the first one, June 14th. We're going to have meetings throughout the year. And so you could go to su.org to find out more about Singularity University.
Okay.
I also see our chapter on there, and you can join our chapter page too.
Cool. And that first meeting is going to be here at T-Rex, right?
Here in T-Rex on June 14th, starting at 5:30 in the evening. Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, you heard it. If you're interested in talking more about this and getting involved, obviously show up June 14th, get registered on the website ahead of time. And I think I'll be there personally. It sounds pretty fascinating. So I'm excited about it. So I think at this point, we're going to transition and bring in our good friend Eric on the show. Eric always likes to come through and introduce the bourbon we're drinking. He's also the sponsor and creator of Bourbon Friday itself. So it's always an honor to have Eric here. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thank you very much. So today we have Evan Williams Single Barrel.
Okay.
Last week we had the #1 distiller of bourbon. Evan Williams is number 2.
Number 2, okay.
Yeah, but Single Barrel, I really tried this week to come up with how to relate this.
Sure.
The simple way is to say, well, Single Barrel is just a convergence of all of these things having to come together. That thing went in the barrel 8 years ago, and now it's coming out. But I wanted to go a little bit more than that, because I thought, that's a little boring. We've already done healthcare.
Sure.
Right. So what else could I talk about? Well, what I was thinking about is the power of a name, and how we come up with names for our companies and all of that. So how does that all relate back to bourbon? And where did that name come from? Right. So bourbon ultimately goes back to a French family name, a French dynasty for bourbon.
Okay.
But there's 2 different stories that get told for bourbon of where the name came from. It was either after the Revolutionary War, it was a thank you to the French, the name of Bourbon County in Kentucky. right? And that's where it was first made. But there's also another story that most of this whiskey was getting sent down to New Orleans to be like shipped out. This is the type of bourbon type of whiskey that is served on Bourbon Street. Okay. But both names are related back to the French dynasty. Now, how does this all relate? Well, Janus, in addition to being the Roman god, is also the name of a 14th century Cyprus king.
Okay.
His wife was Charlotte de Bourbon.
Oh, there you go.
From the French family. That all bourbon ultimately is named after.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that very
I had to go like 6 degrees of separation there for sure.
Well, it's like a research paper. I like it. All right. Well, I'm excited to be drinking this today. So appreciate that, Eric. So to get into kind of the final few minutes of the show, we always like to end things with kind of a little bit of a group discussion. And so Darryl and I were talking earlier about, one of your big focuses is on digital inclusion. And I know that's going to be a big focus of Singularity University in St. Louis. And so I thought we should just talk a little bit about, kind of what is St. Louis's role in these bigger conversations, because we were talking before the show about kind of the impact St. Louis has had. A lot of these, some of these movements have started in St. Louis. Obviously, Ferguson happened a few years ago, and that kind of kicked off the whole Black Lives Matter movement. So, talking about specifically digital inclusion from your perspective, but as a bigger conversation, what do you think the role is of St. Louis in these bigger conversations?
Well, I mean, the reason I wanted Singularity here in St. Louis and the benefit I see is every city needs to focus on what makes them unique. Yeah. And with St. Louis, it's really having a discussion about diversity and inclusion, right? Diversity and inclusion is a global problem, but you have a lot of areas, especially around the United States, where they're not at the stage of at least openly even discussing it.
Okay.
And so when you're talking about finding people who are passionate about solving problems, it's really our people that are the bottleneck.
Sure.
And so if you're talking about unlocking not only different minority groups, unlocking women, unlocking different underrepresented populations, then the number of passionate people that you can enable to change society is that much greater.
Interesting. Okay.
And so when you're looking at just specifically digital inclusion, a lot of people think it's about computers or it's about broadband.
Yeah.
It's really about what you do with it and how it impacts your society. And so when you're looking at, just the fact of healthcare, with healthcare, patients get sent home sooner. They have to take care of themselves, be educated on what to do. But right now, it's like wearable technologies, Bluetooth technology, using computers and apps.
Yeah.
How do you do that if you don't have Wi-Fi in your house?
Sure.
How do you stay connected to do telehealth, telenursing? It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so this divide on the digital side, which is increased to larger health disparities. And likewise with education, it's hard to go through schools now without a computer.
Oh, yeah.
But if you give children a computer, some children don't have Wi-Fi at home, don't have broadband at home. And so why would they even take a free computer home if they cannot connect it to the computer?
Access the information or any of the tools that are on the internet, right?
Yeah. And if they're not interacting with these tools, then the tools aren't learning from them.
Right.
And that just increases the bias against them.
And that just increases the biases. So we're talking about workforce training. How can you expect someone who wants to learn how to advance their career, they don't have a computer to actually learn it in an automated way at home because they might have jobs that stop it from working classic in an 8 to 5 educational setting. Right?
Yes. Yeah, I think, one of the areas we see this in our business, so we don't do much of this anymore, but we do flyer distributions. We'll hire, especially kids from the city that'll come out and help us put out flyers on doors. And I think a lot of people, they assume like, oh, everybody has a smartphone now, which most people do have a smartphone. But one thing I learned, from working with a lot of them is that it's not often connected to the internet, which is what you're getting at, right? So I think that there's a lot of us that, especially growing up, I grew up in St. Charles, and you don't see any of that at all, and I think that I was making some assumptions there. Oh, everybody's got the phone in their pocket, but a lot of them are 3 or 4 years old. They hardly run anymore. They're always getting turned off because maybe they missed the bill or they couldn't afford to pay it. And I think that's I would assume obviously plays into this whole digital inclusion is that, like you said, that just having the device is not enough. So I think a lot of us are making these assumptions about well, they're fine. They have a phone, they got a computer, but obviously that's not the point, right?
Right. The point is making sure everyone has a voice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to have a voice and express yourself without using technology.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, on top of that, I think even if you do have access to the internet, we're starting to pay for more and more of the things we use online, right? And so again, there's another, financial barrier to even accessing a lot of this information or tools.
Definitely,
right?
yeah.
Cool. So I guess this is something, this will be a main topic for Singularity University, especially in this chapter? Or?
At least the Singularity U St. Louis chapter here, right?
Okay,
yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So you heard it here. If you're looking to address some of these problems, obviously this is a big inequality type of issue that we're trying to address. We'd love to have you there at Singularity U on June 14th, right?
Yes.
So again, with that meeting, do we need to RSVP ahead of time, or are people allowed to just show up to the first meeting?
Yeah, so we'll have an Eventbrite link on there. If you go to if you sign up on the su.org site, you'll get the event listing on there where you can get more information.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
It should be up in a week. We're still working
in a week.
up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So wait 1 week and then check out the website.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. All right. Well, again, the signal, we got to wrap things up. Darryl, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you.
Eric, thank you for joining us as always. Appreciated all the information. So just a couple people I want to thank and a couple organizations. We always like to say thank you to T-Rex itself for hosting us here for both our event and the show. Thank you to EQ for providing the equipment and the EQ Media Lab. Thank you to Vanessa Lobo, the co-founder of Connects Marketing. She's my co-founder. I usually don't bring up Connects Marketing for myself, but I can when I bring up Vanessa. So Connects Marketing. And she does a lot of the work behind the scenes, so she makes us look good and sound good. So thank you so much for that. So that wraps up the show for today. We do go live every Friday at 4:30 from T-Rex. If you would like to join us for the Bourbon Friday event, please send us a message through the EQ media page. We'll go ahead and respond to you there, and we'll get you RSVP'd. So thanks for tuning in, and check in again with us next week at 4:30.